you very much. So I'm going to talk about an issue that I'm sure is not so common for experts in labor law, because I'm going to talk about competencies development and recognition, with a special focus on validating non-formal and informal learning, and a specific reference to non-formal learning development at the workplace. So, as I said, I know it's not a common issue for labor law experts, both at the national and at European level, but I will try to show why I think that is an important issue to consider also, but not only as a matter of educational policy, but also as a matter of employment policy. And I will try to show also the interconnection with other relevant policy fields at the European level, and other policy fields which have in common the regulation of occupational and professional transitions in the labour market. So here I will try to recall a theoretical perspective which has been mentioned by Professor Alex before, the flexicurity theoretical approach, which is much different from the institutional, European institutional agenda for flexicurity, and a particular reference to the transitional labour market theories. And following from the Schmid researches, we also know that the borders between labour market and other social systems are more and more open to what we call transitory states between employment, gainful employment, and on-market activities, and people face more and more transitions in the labour market, from job to another job, from employment to job, training, family care, and so on. So, as we have been asked to imagine the future of European labour law, I will just try to imagine which role competencies, individuation, development, recognition, and especially transferability, not only from a country to another, this is the perspective of the European institution, but also in internal careers in the labour market, in the same country, in the same labour market, which role these policies could have or will have in the future. Because there is a strong debate about these issues. There are also a lot of financial opportunity offered by European institutions to develop projects in this field, the recognition of non-formal and informal learning, but the impression is that these policies are not still considered as a crucial element of the employment relationship and as a new let's say, as important terms on which a new exchange can be built both at an individual or at a collective level. So is it a global issue? I think we can say yes, because in 2009, 144 UNESCO member states met and seen the so-called Belém framework for actions, and then in 2012 we have guidelines from UNESCO about validation of non-formal and informal learning. And there are a lot of contextual factors that are developments in different parts of the world to pay attention to this topic. Changes in labour force with the adult part of the workforce, which is more and more important, and adults need a constant, let's say, updating of competencies and a recognition of prior experiences to face labour market transitions. There are growing difficulties in securing the labour market integration of young people. The problem here is that education and training formal institutions are no more able to provide young people with the skills needed from the labour market. So we need to recognize also skills developed in other contexts, work experiences, but also other experiences such as volunteering activities or other kind of activities. And also an issue is geographical mobility and immigration flows. And we know that European institutions' primary aim when they address this issue is to promote mobility across countries, but also a strong emphasis is on promoting access to better job opportunities and to higher level of qualification for the workforce. Even if all this is considered as, let me say, as an offset for the reduction of employment protection. So the idea is we are reducing employment protection, we have to provide new tools to help people to face transitions in the labor market. So how the issue has been addressed now by European institutions. As we all know, we are in the field of the soft law, non-binding regulations, but initiatives at the European level are having a strong influence in how member states are addressing the issue. For example, in the Italian case, we had a legislative decree in 2013, which is more, let me say, inspired by the Council recommendation of 2012 on validating non-formal and informal learning. So there is, let me say, overall conversion by relevant actors at the national level. We had in 2004 the European Common Principle for Validation of Non-Formal and Informal Learning. We had the European Qualification Framework recommendation, and then in the field of vocational training and education we have the ECOVET recommendation and the ECAVET about quality in vocational education and training. We had in 2009 European guidelines to help member states to develop systems for validating non-formal and informal learning, and what is more important, we had in 2012 a Council recommendation on validation of non-formal and informal learning. And also, I think it's interesting to see that it is also an issue that has been addressed by social partners at the European level in the frame of the sectoral social dialogue. And we had framework of actions, for example, in the electricity sector in 2015. We also had the declarations or joint opinions in the banking service sector in 2015, or guidelines in the educational service sector, and so on. So, sort of engagement from social partners at the European level. But notwithstanding the efforts at the European level, progress in validation has been uneven, irregular and very slow in European countries, with only 3 countries which have a comprehensive strategy in place. Low stakeholders involvement, especially social partners, are not so involved in the national systems. And there is a lack of uniformity in procedures used in companies versus procedures set in the public system, which represent a huge problem, because that means that competency validated in the workplace cannot be easily recognized when you try to access to further qualification in the formal education or training system, or when you benefit of services by employment services, for example, and so on. In 17 countries in Europe, a link between validation practices and the national qualification framework, so the formal training for qualification recognition, doesn't still exist, so validation is really partial. As I said, the Council recommendation of December 2012 has represented an important step, because the recommendation says that all member states should have in place no later than 2018 arrangements for validation of formal and informal learning. The recommendation encourages a single process encompassing different steps. So the first is individuation, then validation, assessment, and then a public certification of competencies developed. Underline the role of publicly authorized bodies in the work process toward the final certification. It seems to me that in this recommendation, the main purpose of validation is to allow to access to further formal qualification. So it seems to me to be just a matter of educational policies again. So the main aim is to access to a higher level of formal qualification, with not so much attention to the role of validation itself for careers development purposes. And they need that individuals have to see their competencies recognized in the workplace and then in the market. There is, the recommendation points out that social partners should promote and facilitate the identification and documentation of learning outcomes acquired at work, but doesn't set precise roles or responsibilities for employers or for social partners. And there is also the promotion of an individual use just on a voluntary basis of the so-called informative tools. All of you obviously know the so-called Europass toolkit, so European curriculum vitae or language passport. These are just informative tools. They do not have any value, and they just have purpose to promote transparency across Europe. So it seems to me to be a loose approach, which is going to be transposed into national legislation. It is the case of Italy. And it's going to cause limited participation by companies and social partners and other actors towards a formalistic approach, in my view. Because the primary interest of European institutions is to assuring formal qualification recognition in different member states. And as I said, on the contrary, the primary aim of individuals entering into a validation procedure is not necessarily to obtain a higher level of formal qualifications, but just to make their skills visible for career development purposes. This leads us to the difference which has been underlined in the literature about formative and summative dimension of validation. The first one is with the effect of validation on people employability, and that's why I use this term in my title. Or the value that assessed skills can assume, as I said, in the internal and in the external labor market. On the contrary, the summative dimension, which has been adopted by European institutions, concerns the possibility that competencies can be recognized and referred to the formal qualification system. Both the dimensions are important and interrelated, but my impression is that the excessive focus on the final formal qualification has led to underestimate the role of companies and has pushed validation outside the employment relationship. So, as I said, I would like also to show that there are a lot of interrelations between this issue that seems to be just, as I said, a very specific issue with not so great consequences in the employment relationship or in labor market policies, but it is strongly related with other fields of regulation. For example, the professional qualification recognition. As we can read in Article 14 of the directive, that you obviously already know, the directive is about the possibility to recognize professional recognition obtained in a member state in a different member state with a different regulation for professional qualification. And the new member state can impose compensation measures for who is coming from another country in certain cases. And Article 14 says any compensation measure foreseen for professional recognition in a member state should be proportionate and in particular take account of the knowledge, skills and competencies acquired by the applicant in the course of his professional experience or through lifelong learning. So it reminds us of formal and informal learning when they are formally validated to that end by a relevant body. So there is a possible imbalance between countries with different level of development of validation systems. Professionals coming from countries with advanced system will have more chance of recognition of their qualification with respect to professionals coming from countries where this system doesn't exist. Another important connection is with the employment policies, because if you look at all the main initiatives in the field of youth employment policies, I will just mention European Youth Strategy, European Alliance for Apprenticeship, or the European Youth Guarantee Program, which are also connected with important investment, financial investment on the part of the European institution. In all these cases, there is a reference to validation of informal and informal learning. But again, when we look at the implementation of these programs, we see that, for example, very few European Youth Guarantee national implementation plans include validation of non-formal and informal learning. The focus is more on start-up incentives and other measures. And also, obviously, there is a strong connection with the active labor market policies. There has been recently a proposal from the European Commission for a Council recommendation on the integration of long-term unemployed. There is the recommendation to employment services to provide individualized services an individual assessment covering previous career and employability perspectives. And there is also the proposal of a job integration agreement aimed at setting specific goals and obligations for unemployed and for employment services, which should include, again, validation of non-formal and informal learning, but as showed by analysis carried out by the European Commission, an individualized approach is not so common in employment services across Europe, especially when we talk about a long-term unemployed, and there is no use of validation for determining, for example, training offer or suitable job offer to unemployed people. So I'm going to conclude, which are the actual barriers and the possible future direction. I have to admit that when I started this research project, I have to say, too much sociological imagination to see which will be the possible future directions, and I was already thinking about a directive which will impose to all employers to certify competences developed at the workplace, but after our meeting in Oxford I suddenly realized that I should be more careful. Well, the idea is just possible amendment of the Council recommendation, which are already foreseen, because there is the possibility to amend the recommendation before 2019, after all the member states will have completed their systems. The idea is the need to enforce and clarify employers and social partners' role, support the formative dimension of validation, promote financial support at a national level for these initiatives, and promoting a stronger link with the active labour market policies. But it's true that the low stakeholder participation, especially on the side of employers, is due not only to a regulation problem, but to a mutual distrust between employers and employees, because employers do not want to recognize competence because they fear of remuneration issues. And employees do not want to be controlled about their performance at work. So it is difficult to overcome this problem, but comparative analysis shows the collective agreement can play a role, social partners can play a stronger role, they can promote the use of validation in company, but also they can clarify the difference between validating competencies and professional qualification and a public recognition of competencies, which are different things. Consequently, I'm going to conclude also the action promoted by social partners at the European level, the framework sectoral dialogue could be better considered to see if they are interconnected with the European institution efforts and they can be, let's say, an impact on national debate. Thank you for your time.